Okay. Excellent. Glad to see you again. So, I said you are required to visit my personal webpage about retrieval of a course materials, and also you are advised to audit this class, which would be provided in cyberspace of this campus. So we plan to review the context of laws, administrative laws, and public administration. And one insight may be useful about interplay of both actors. You see, Brown Law Committee was charged in Roosevelt administration around 1930s, reported the kind of bureaucrats and many branches of administration are staffed with a head-risk bureau, head-risk public officers. What does it mean? Head-risk force branch in some elevation about to denote the context. The head-risk force branch. It is eloquent to reveal the true nature of that anomaly or kind of a misdirection. So some reasons may be offered in terms of a dual sovereignty or such a travel nature of a federal constitution, amenable to many avenues of a argument or others. So both regime should be in more intelligent interplay about a federal system and others. So inseparable to heal ahead as coupled. So public officers are responsible to know the command of a constitution and statutory duties and responsibilities are often well defined. But in many cases, delegation also be practiced to depend on discretion of a bureaucrat, agencies, so public agencies. So also one context is useful to let you exposed to the context. The constitutional challenge was once being filed in the federal court about arbitrary exercise of delegation, congressional delegation. However, that is a basic instrumentality that the Congress of the United States actually are less sufficient in resources and their capabilities to address the scope of a social public challenges. The problems are, in some cases, required of a professional review and decisions. And discretion is inevitable to address a distributive justice, a specific justice, and the concept of a polished addresses are important. in comparison with the general power and abstract nature of authority about legislation and enactment. So how do we find a compromise in a proper sense, a doctrine of clarity or particularity, and so the practice of Congress when they rely on delegation should be clearly drawn in line about scope of a delegated work and a standard, a guideline to exercise a discretion by units and branches. So actually it is a preserve of a intense interaction between law, administrative law, and the responsibilities of public agencies. So it is inseparable, as I've introduced. We turn to review Theme 1 about the evolution of the administrative state. So how do you perceive the evils of a free market? The phenomena became intolerable in early centuries, and Great Depression actually provoked some social initiative which heralded the Roosevelt administration. So New Deal is one of a great moment. We can look into the nature of a public administration, and also the kind of concept, a business-like administration, has been developed by Woodrow Wilson. So two figures are very important in understanding the public administration of the United States. So the public administration is actually witnessed in two stages over history of the United States. So the paradigm of limited government was prevalent in 19th centuries, dominantly. Perhaps in the late 19th century, the idea about active provisional state or active state would burgeon, actually, and that trend has developed into chapter of a new century. So the three trends attributed to the public administration, as I've said, a political, a legal, and managerial. Are set to respond to a separation of powers principle and the paradigm of respective state paradigm. For example, in limited government, the political attribute of public administration is fairly strong. So the bureaucrats and branches units are principally responsible to the elected officials. So they see a pivotal, the political aspect of administration. The managerial purview would prevail if we see some business-like public administration, as espoused by President Woodrow Wilson, and the legal aspect would figure in more force if also in a limited paradigm of government. So actually the attribute of each historical stage could be discerned if you see the wake of a democratic history in the United States. So political leaders from the beginning of recorded history have controlled the subjects through rules and government enforcement of laws. Most aspects of life have been regulated at some time in history, and some public concerns have been regulated since ancient times. For example, regulation of ferryboat operators trace back to 1900 BC. In 1901, archaeologists working in what is now Iraq discovered ancient stone inscriptions, now known as the Code of Hammurabi, king of Babylon. The code, a record of legal rulings the king had made during his reign, contained 28 entries carefully organized by subject matter. So it is most antedated remnants we see in terms of legal history, and often we consider two important moments, historical moments about evolution of legal culture. So Roman Empire is very implicating and impressive in which influences the understanding of legal historians. So Justinian's Code and others. So the development of public laws actually antedated the private context of laws. So the public administration, public law, seem to be more essential in terms of society and polity. So the concept of law is actually unavoidable if we manage a collective public life. And the tension between private and public law would rise in involving the democratic transformation of society, typically imposing to influence through the contemporary times of capitalistic society. You see, the failure of government is an important theme in early of last century. So now the pastorality of a capitalist economy can now be traced in terms of a public governance. So why government failed to respond properly, effectively, to eradicate evils and others. So the New Deals are the context you see responsive and in some sense very revolutionary about labor standard, for example, minimum wage act, and what are work hours acceptable humanly by working class? How do you consider? So exploitation with minimum wage, so piecemeal compensation could be acceptable? How do you agree? So that is the effort and a public focus that the society and government endeavored on. Production actually also be stripped since they reveals the context of merger and others. Price valorization, a monopolistic power is very problematic and troublesome, imposing to threat the social justice actually. So the Sherman Act and others to redress the kind of social injustice had been pursued. You see, so actually the paradigm has shifted in very revolutionary context, and stirred the conservative Supreme Court justices. So actually it faced with a harsh reaction by many judgments rendered by then conservative justices of Supreme Court. So you see some informal context which could be hidden story about the plan to dilute the voice of a Supreme justices. It is called a packing plan. So the then administration attempted to increase the number of justices, which leads to weaken the strong stance of a Supreme Court justice. One way to countervail. So the actually a new perspective is, surely desired, and also the failure of government would be obvious if the New Deal package was rejected by public powers. So actually the context also involved operation of separation of powers principle. So both branches had to effectively communicate the difficulties and the crisis of society. So that context was actually blocked. So what is the tool to respond with that reaction? Unique source would lie in appointment power. So President Roosevelt explored this possible effect. How do you consider? If you are in presidency, what could you do to make progress about the stalemate evils of a society? And now the legal historian began to give their interest to the Greek vestige. For example, Code of Hammurabi and others. It actually antedated the Roman rule mostly, and there it is surprising to see the archives, and also in this case you will have a Code Hammurabi, who is king of Babylon, and which contains retributive view of a criminal justice system, very representative and eloquent about retribution, and many other archaics. You see, it contained 280 entries carefully organized by subject matter, and 25 sections regulated a variety of professionals, among whom were 40 men. Similarly, in the 18th century, one of Maryland state legislature, 4 statutes, authorized the county judges to set the maximum prices that could be charged by those foreign passengers and cargo across the state's waterways. In 1838, after one too many explosions of the steamboat boilers, Congress created an agency to inspect steamboats for safety. Today, if you travel across the northwestern part of Washington state, you'll cross a Puget Sound by a state-operated ferry. So actually, it is connected in sense of public administration. So we have two same subject matter, foreign passengers. So very classic through the modern context of administration. And actually, the nature and dynamism were exercised by public administration may share a common trace, and you see. And surely, if a phenomena such as government control of the foreign business occurs throughout human history, good reasons for it must exist. Public safety is one obvious reason. Another, which applies equally to ancient Babylon, 18th century Baltimore, and 20th century Bremerton, Washington, is perhaps less obvious. Once a society begins to follow the principle of division of labor, some people will develop a monopolies. The person who controls the land, where people find it safe to cross the river, or the person who has obtained the privilege of forwarding people across for a fee, possesses a natural monopoly. He can charge not only his operational costs plus a reasonable profit, but whatever the customer is willing to pay, which may be much more. Farmers in ancient and modern times alike resent losing part of the value of their crop to such a monopolist, and they complain to their king or the government when they believe someone goes against them. The foreign business, in other words, is an ancient example of a natural monopoly and hence of a free market failure. So how do you consider between the government failure and free market failure? So actually, the context has been exacerbated around the 2 world wars, World War I and World War II. And the wake of a worse situation of times in early 20th century, actually it was a point to revisit after World War II. So we reflect in regret and ambition about the United Nations, International Trade Organization, and what others, International Monetary Fund. So the players in this case would multiply since the international community recognized the fairness and justice between the public and private sphere. So complicated evolution has occurred around time. And now WTO actually is a representative organ to safeguard the free market. And also the member state is principally responsible for the social justice within the nation. And WTO is an umpire among the interplay of both actors. So government has no plenary authority about regulations. So the concept of world market and fair competition and trade liberalization actually latch it as a core theme. So it actually entails a delicate aspect about our public life and economy, a free market economy. And so in this term, we'll see the context in national perspective. So we consider the administrative law and others. Actually, the social justice and public administration involves, importantly, the economic aspect, so which is distinct from a civil law series or familiar matters. You learn familiar laws in this law department, and also you have many subjects involved: the civil, contract law, tort law. The context could be divided in intelligent preserve of law, so between private and public law, which is national, would be same in this class. And also you have chance to review the context of interplay as involved with international authority. So what is the customs union? How do you see the practice of a nation state against non-member states of a customs union? 5 and 10 times much more the rate of national customs could be acceptable? Should it be discriminatory against member states? The non-member states could be escalated in tension and conflict against the customs union. So actually, that is an economic issue. However, in some classic times, it may be received as kind of a quasi-national strategy, in parallel with military response in some cases, and sanction and pressure of international community may be effective interchangeably to some extent with a military response. So what? Freezing of a foreign assets against the enemy state, in some sense, aggressive state, or what? The state which practices the violation of human rights, then the response could be shaped in terms of economic sanction on others. A peacekeeping operation may be explored. How do you see it to be interchangeable? That implies the era in advance of administrative state and international tension around 1930s and 1940s. So how do you consider the role of WTO, which begins the mission in 1995? They keep on their proper role about economic justice and materialistic welfare. But why should powerful kings listen to ordinary citizens? Honoring the claims of citizens often means ruling against the interests of the wealthy and powerful. What political advantage does a king gain by siding with the powerless? How can he explain the existence of regulation in the public interest? This is one of the great fundamental questions of politics in general, and one to which we can suggest the beginning of an answer. Some rulers are truly altruistic. Others try to remain popular to prevent uprisings that could remove them from power by force. Furthermore, rulers throughout history have had to build and maintain the power to fight, to defend a territory against outsiders at the very least, and wage effective territorial conquest at best. History rather clearly indicates that rulers, while they may win battles, do not win wars when the bulk of citizenry resists them or stops caring about the outcome. Thucydides' history of the losses of Athens to Sparta teaches this lesson. So does the United States defeat in Vietnam and its failures in Iraq? To maintain political popularity and military strength, rulers must please not just those few with wealth and power, but also the less wealthy majority that constitutes the political base and on whose morale the war effort depends. This, in fact, is the most significant aspect of democracy as a political system. It gives people a tangible resource, the right to vote, to make sure the rulers in a democracy, the politicians, are forced to please them. Today we use words like liberty, equality, and individual dignity in our discussions of public policy. We want to believe the government serves all social interests. These values are indeed noble, but we must recognize that governments honor them partly for reasons of a self-preservation. So the concept of self-preservation is very assumed in its inception of nation state. So how do you see? And also liberty, equality, and individual dignity, long been considered prongs and essences about national government and even in international organization. Some scholars even reach out to use the term international government. However, the extent is proper to denote as government other than organization. How do you consider? In any case, liberty and equality are basic themes to be pursued in WTO, for example. Trade liberalization represents the ideal of liberty in terms of a enterprise and private forms, corporations. What is equality? It constitutes a non-discrimination doctrine. So linguistically, it does denote same, equal, between equal and non-discrimination. So what is a most favored nation clause and national treatment clause? What are the scope of constitutional provisions in Korea about the liberty to housing and equality, notwithstanding races, ethnicity, sexes, and social class? So, how do you consider the monopolistic powers in early 20th century? Could the United States government a guarantee of self-preservation if some small number of wealthy people only could survive? How about large base of political constituents? What are social public goods? And we also review the rise of a domestic government in the United States. So once again, recall the Maryland statute allowing county judges to regulate 40 charges. Why would judges rather than administrators perform such tasks? The early authors of regulations, Hammurabi or the Maryland legislature, had no grand scheme of a administrative government plotted out for the future. In Maryland, county judges were mainly responsible for governing the countries. The legislature simply added the setting of ferry rates to their list of duties. Congress's early efforts to create administrative agencies had no grand design either. The first Congress of 1789 faced two problems, which the expedient solution at the time rather obviously seemed an office or an agency. The first problem was to establish a way of estimating the duties that importers should pay on goods they obtain in foreign countries. The second task was to organize a response to claims for pensions filed by soldiers wounded and disabled during the late war. So how do you consider the agencies in the executive could be more responsive and ready to address the social challenges problem? So actually, you can see the context of political context of public administration, other than managerial or legal. So they are responsible and report faithfully to the elected officials. If we cherish the ideas of democracy in that strong sense, we may see a more superiority within the kind of a communist states, for example. Even the judicial organs in the communist states should be responsible to the People's Assembly at each level and length, which corresponds with the judiciary in responsibility. Of course, it is fair sim and acceptable standard of practice that the administrative officers are responsible to the elected officials, and the context also seems to be increased in terms of Korean politics. So now we expect to see the local election coming soon in June. It's actually the virtue of democratic rule and foundation in theory and ideas would go in that way. However, it explaining all the virtues to be ensured within the constitutional rule. How to consider? The administrative officer could be agile and most in forefront, might be a vanguard in some sense to respond with a public need. For example, I was heard many welfare officers in Korea routinely visit the deprived old resident, aged residents, high aged actually, and they have no means to survive independently without lawyer compensation or pension offered by the government. And in for the reason of a fiscal deficit, the pension was discontinued in some area. So the politicians actually, my showcase is a failure in depraved manner, showing a picket to the public. So actually, many works and responsibilities have been administered by terminal officers employed by the executive branch. That means, of course, more resources reserved within the executive branch, and capabilities would outrival other two branches, legislative and judiciary. So we now faced with that context of a governmental law throughout this course. In one sense, these early agencies had very modest aims. They resulted not from any monumental political battles between the wealthy and the common man, but rather from a basic need to serve widely recognized public interest. Notice also how both these tasks fit squarely into the age or reasons for government to protect us. Domestic producers, in this case, against them, foreign competition, and to encourage, in the case of veterans' claims, the willingness to fight in defense of country. The expansion of administrative government in the United States since 1789 did not follow anyone's plan. One relatively minor contemporary indication of this fact is that the various names of government offices, agency, board, commission, administration bureau, and so forth, tell you absolutely nothing about the office to which they attach. So, as I said, it often be created ad hoc basis, and piecemeal expansion in response with the rise of new public issues. And that is actually a fairly a tendency found in the American government. Patchwork to redress the evils of monopoly. Once we have experienced some useful lecture about Enron fraud, it's actually brought the extent of a public sensibilities, world sensibilities actually, against the fraudulent conduct of a big enterprise. So, failure to report properly about accounting and the assets. So the stock price may be falsified to allure the investors and others. Understanding the growth of administrative government, particularly in the 20th century, requires a review of some economic history. The producer of, say, Flemish harpsichords in Antwerp in the 17th century would have belonged to a guild. The agreements and customs of the guild control most aspects of the harpsichord trade. Who could work, how many units per year they could produce, price, wages, and the like. The introduction of so-called free competition would only upset this balance. So the production mode of guild is made distinctive from current form of a production. So they actually manage the planning economy about prices and wages and the units produced per year. The introduction of by the end of 18th century, however, the concept of free and unlimited competition had been elevated from something devilish to something holy. So the paradigm might shift in this sense. The free and unlimited competition now be considered virtuous, holy. In no small part, because of Adam Smith's wild read The Wealth of Nations, people in power began to undo self-imposed restrictions on who could produce how many of each goods. Freedom to compete was also the freedom to specialize. And in specializing and dividing labor lay the key to increasing the productivity of labor. So actually the idea also depends on division of labor. You may have named a Ricardo, who is very foundational to understand international trade. And also, once we have heard a story of Kruger, was a Nobel Prize winner, Nobelist actually, in economy, and he raised some complementary perspective to support the international trade, which actually activated despite no competitive advantage. How do you consider? So the Ricardo perspective may be complemented and in some aspect denied from phenomenology actually. he presented his view in rank and very persuasive to understand the current regime of international trade and phenomena, actually. In any case, you see the speedier transformation, a very speedier. Apple, the forms of Apple, smartphone. I'm not well accustomed to the device, but actually the turn of a new product is very shorter. We have also the context of specialization to see many varied form of products and others. So actually that is a materialistic prosperity, I consider. And that is a source of income to exploit and boost our national economies. Actually, the concept also is well in accord with the creative economy, now advocated by national government of Korea. This idea seemed particularly benign in America, where the losers in the competitive game could simply go west rather than starve. Laissez-faire rule, so that the major 19th century manufacturing, banking, and transportation business operated with near complete freedom from either government or guild-imposed regulations. If anything, by the last half of the century, government actively promoted a business. Government promotion of business and protection of private property rights is itself a form of regulation, although we do not commonly use the term regulation in this sense. So, no law or regulation actually could be seen as regulation, as a kind of a perversion in understanding. So limited government and no regulation, but a strong adherence with liberal constitution, a place to promote a business and protect the commercial class and other. So often we see stacks of laws and decrees as regulatory. In this era, the context might be perverted. The economic theory of laissez-faire favors open competition among capitalists of government control of the economy, but it also relies on the state to protect their private property rights and to enforce private business agreements, such as contract. Even Adam Smith recognized that the state played an important role in policing and maintaining order for the free market. So it is two wheels for the capitalist: sanctity of property, right, and freedom of contract. And what are others to be necessary to shield their interest? That is limitation of civil liability. So strict requirement of law is necessary to impose civil liability on capitalist class. What actually the kind of culpability, civil culpability. Often we say culpability in the context of a criminal law, civil culpability. So negligent and reckless disregard. How to consider? The concept of a strict liability, a product liability, comes as contrary. So in the classic times, so triadic actually, encompassing a sanctity of property, a freedom of contract, limitation of civil liability, had been favored to promote a business interest. So actually, the intrinsic role of state in classic era should be limited, since it is limited government. So the police role and defense service against aggression of foreign enemy would be typical, which falls within the responsibility of government. And the regulation about a contract is fairly diminutive, actually. And the Court of Chancery, however, would be an institution about the conscience of monarchy. The concept had resurrected in modern times, as you see Fair Trade Commission of Republic of Korea, for example, and we have such organs in many countries. So unconscious contract may be regulated and impose the monetary penalty in gross sum, as we encountered occasionally in the newspaper. In any case, the context of limited intervention has been practiced. Besides the law of Court of Chancery, what is? So that also allows some highlight in point about the nature of law and public administration. If the law is replacement of king, monarch, then what is the public administration? So conscience and social justice is the theme to be pursued in this discipline. Law would be sovereign in some sense in replacement of monarch. So you may have some idea if you surface of a brief history of classic times, Court of Chancery, monarchy. What are who are those and what are those institutions? Business bought some of this support with outright bribes. Standard Oil, a common joke of times, put it, did everything to the Ohio legislature except refine it. Yeah, even without bribes, the government would have assisted railroad and lumber and cattle interests with huge grants of land. It would have maintained high tariffs, an anti-competitive policy disguised as promoting competition. Local police and the National Guard supported management with physical force in the 1892 Homestead Steel Strike. Facing a devastating labor strike in 1894, the Pullman Company bypassed the more progressive state government in Illinois and took its case straight to President Grover Cleveland, who sent in the army to break up the strike. For the bulk of the century, these forces converged to produce a remarkably unrestrained economy, mushrooming industrial technology, the climax in the electrification of America. Tremendously abundant natural resources easily exploited by well-capitalized large corporations, a thoroughly pro-business attitude by government, and a series of laissez-faire to call upon for support. Well before the end of the century, however, this burst of economic freedom, this exception to the more usual course of economic history, began to die. the more successful business engaged in powerful domination of the less successful. And when economic panics struck, as they have throughout economic history, even more monopolizing occurred as investors created trust to restore the blessed protection of the gears. Before the end of the century, this unrestrained power had begun to impose such crushing cost on the average citizen that democratic politics mobilized to check it. Here, for example, is the farmer's point of view in 1891. It is interesting to look into the nature of society, and particularly in terms of capitalistic development and prevalence of souls in lay class and others. Farmers are passing through the valley and shadow of death. Farming as a business is profitless. Values of farm products have fallen 50% since the Great War, and farm values have depreciated at 25 to 50% during the last 10 years. Farmers are of home with debts secured by mortgages on their homes, unable in many instances to pay even the interest as it falls due, and unable to renew the loans because securities are weakening by reason of general depression. Many farmers are losing their homes under this dreadful blight, and the mortgage may still glides. We are in hands of merciless power. The people's homes are at stake. From this array of testimony, the reader need have no difficulty in determining for himself how we got here. The hand of the money changer is upon us. Money dictates our financial policy. Money controls the business of the country. Money is despoiling the people, and blah, blah, blah. So we now come to an end of this class. I should have hastened to read 2 stories, probably for the next class. And I also promised to upload a refined form of a course materials. So I've hurried to upload since actually you have to suffer however, the course material, as you see, have no titles and sections, and includes long pages, unfiltered. So I will marshal in articulation about your clear viewpoint about this class discussion. I promise. Okay. Thank you for your attention, and we'll see you in the next class.